Monster Guys present a Yokai podcast presentation, bringing to life, through short stories and informative discussion, the strange, the beautiful, the whimsical, and the mystery of Japanese yokai.
Now please enjoy a story about
the Sagari and the Uma-no-ashi in a story titled An Old Fool's Warning, written and narrated by C. Michael McGannon, presented by the Monster Guys.
A merchant had promised to deliver goods to the south. He passed through many towns, stopping one night in a small fishing village for rest. Checking into an inn, he secured his cart loaded with goods and led his faithful horse to the stables. Before bedding for the evening, he sat for a meager dinner and drink. An old man with an unruly mop of hair and a wild look in his eye caught his attention. The old man stared at the merchant at length before patting down his white kimono and exiting the room abruptly. Soon after, the merchant forgot the matter entirely. Later that night, the merchant heard screams and wails, setting his nerves on edge. Quickly he rose and dressed himself, then walked outside the inn to see what the ruckus was. It was the unruly man. His white clothing had become ruffled, and he waved his sword haphazard, yelling at the direction of the forest. A lean, confident man approached and disarmed the unruly man, who continued to scream at the trees. Two more of the local townspeople helped to escort the crazy man away. The merchant, bewildered, took hold of the innkeeper's shoulder, who had also come out to watch the commotion. He asked what pain or evil had fallen upon the old man. "Oh, nothing," answered the innkeeper. "He's a drunken fool. He fought in the old war. They say a battle was fought in that very forest, and many men died there. But I would not know. It was before my time." Troubled, the merchant went back to bed, haunted by dreams of the old man screaming at him and his faithful horse. The next morning, the merchant readied himself for the road. "Where are you headed?" the innkeeper asked during a friendly conversation. The merchant explained his route, mentioning that he would pass through the dense forest to save time between towns. The innkeeper grew quiet, serious. "Do not go there," he said. "I beg of you, go around the forest. It is not safe." The merchant laughed and waved off the innkeeper's fear. He had traveled much of Kyushu and could handle himself just fine. He gave his horse a scratch behind the ears and sat in his cart, the road soon jostling him about in his seat. The next village was still a good distance away, so he determined to waste as little time as possible. The forest was difficult to travel through, but not particularly dangerous as far as the merchant could see. Given the innkeeper's fear, he expected bandits or some other criminal faction to be hiding in the trees. There were none, only the turn of the wheel and the dull conversational skills of his horse. Soon, the sun was prepared to dip beneath the horizon. The merchant grew weary and struck a fire, allowing himself a small meal. Satisfied, he went to sleep, trusting his horse to provide an alarm against danger. Again this night, the merchant was plagued with horrible dreams. This time, he dreamt he was wandering among the trees, hearing the anguished whinnies of hundreds of horses. The merchant woke with a terrible fever, shivering in the embrace of the warm night's soft breeze. Fully awake now, he could still hear a horse whinnying with terror. Fear struck the merchant, for he thought that his horse was under attack by some forest-dwelling rogue. The merchant jumped to his feet and turned to face his faithful companion. But instead of being met with the sight of his own horse, he was met with the vision of a sickly horse's face. The disgusting beast screamed in his own face, fetid breath turning his stomach. The merchant scrambled backward several steps and was horrified to see the horse had no body. Instead, its shriveled neck hung limp and twisted in midair. The whole of the beast's head hung by its ratty mane, tangled in the branches of the tree he had slept beneath. The merchant cried out, terrified. He received a harsh blow between his shoulders, and falling into the ground. Looking in the direction of his attacker, he saw a horse's leg hanging from the branches there, kicking and bucking at the air. His panicked gaze found more and more hanging from trees all around him. The forest was animated with dismembered horse legs and innumerable horse heads. all of which watched him, eyes so wide he could see the strained whites of each eyeball. The merchant was frozen in his fear, feeling more feverish with each passing moment. Suddenly, the screams of a wild man became clear among the hellish cacophony of horse whinnies. The crazy old drunk from town came into view, screaming at the trees and waving his sword. The hanging horse head swayed in response, agitated. The old man grabbed the merchant by his robes and shoved him toward his horse cart. "Go! Leave now!" cried the old drunkard. Without the need for a second urging, the merchant hurled himself into the cart. His horse galloped violently, already having crossed the threshold of its own fear. The merchant braved a final look over his shoulder as he passed through the dark woods. The crazed man was there, but he looked much younger now, sitting atop a horse in regal armor. A company of horses stood behind him, dressed for battle, each screaming their hellish whinnies, long dead. When he arrived back in town, the merchant spoke nothing of what he saw with the villagers or the innkeeper. He arrived at the next town several days late, unwilling to pass through any forest ever again.
The Sagari, a devilish, terrifying yokai. Listening to the story about the Sagari and reading about the Sagari kind of reminds me of that scene in The Godfather with the horse's head on the pillow.
Yeah, it's the Japanese yokai version of that scene for sure. It's very bizarre, very strange.
And not necessarily because it came from anybody as a threat or anything, but it's just there, but it just has that feel to it that I'm looking at a horse's head hanging from a tree.
And some regional variants take it a step further. In this story, we had the horse head dropping down, its hair was tangled in the tree. Some regional variants say that the horse head is hanging from a hand that kind of grows out of its neck.
Oh my gosh.
Or outside of its head.
That's even more disturbing.
Yeah, it's like I said, it's a very strange, bizarre creature. And it doesn't seem to do very much harm. As we saw in the story, it can kind of cause fever. But it's not like the horse head's going to reach out and bite you. It's there to strictly cause fear and unease.
Well, I was going to say the psychological aspect to it alone, you've done harm. So I don't need you to bite me. I'm already marred for life.
I mean, it is disturbing to look up and see a severed horse head whinnying at you, I guess.
And the Sagari is considered a yokai.
Yes.
And what's interesting to me is that part of the story behind the Sagari is that these creatures come from the spirits of dead horses who have been discarded or left to die roadside. Mm-hmm. And what's even further of interest to me is their spirits, as they're rising, if they get tangled in the trees, cannot become the yokai Sagari. But those spirits remain tangled in the trees.
Right. It's kind of a sad, tragic story, which it perhaps lends to the sad whinnying of its figure. They oftentimes are battle horses. Just like in the story, they're just kind of left there, or their owners could not take care of them. So
or maybe
the body,
they died because of weather or disease or
any number
injury.
Of reasons. But they died underneath that tree or leaning against that tree. Maybe their owner died with them. But whatever the reason, their body decomposed there, and the spirit, like you said, it can't really get away from that tree.
It is a terrifying creature. I like the story you wrote about it. Very cool how the merchant encounters this by way of the crazy man and his dreams. So I like that touch. In your story, there is actually another yokai listed along with the Sagari.
Yes, the horse leg?
Yes, the horse legs that are also seen in the forest hanging down from the trees. That's a separate yokai altogether.
Yes, and very, even more brief than the Sagari. You don't see a lot of information on either of these yokai, but the horse leg is called an Uma-no-ashi, and it's very similar. It's just a horse leg hanging out of a tree, basically. But whereas the head will whinny at you, the leg will actually kick you.
It'll
if you
kick
walk
you.
by. Mm-hmm.
It makes sense.
It is a leg. It's not going to talk at you.
Well, I don't know. This is Japanese yokai.
Very true. Very true. But yeah, they're both there. And it's actually, from what I've seen, there are quite a few yokai who have this kind of jump scare aspect where they drop down and they get in front of your face.
Now, the horse leg, is there any backstory to how it has become a yokai? yokai? Is it a discarded...
It's the same.
From the same body of a horse that the head would have risen from?
Yeah, it's the same. Although the Uma-no-ashi almost sounds like the tree itself is the spirit, as opposed to just the leg hanging from the tree.
Well, I've got to be honest. If I'm camping in the woods and I wake up to a horse head and then get bucked behind in my shoulders from that horse's leg hanging from another, I don't know. I'm leaving that forest. I don't think I'm waiting for the crazy man to come tell me to leave the forest. I'm out of there.
Feverish just from the fear alone, I think. I wouldn't need any supernatural causes.
What was interesting to me is that his personal horse, actually hung around to wait on him.
Well, he was a faithful horse.
He was a faithful horse, but I don't care faithful or not. I'd be out of there.
Yeah, no, that is true. But those two were companions, so.
Well, good for him. Good for the horse, I guess.
Plus, I mean, maybe the horse knew that if he was left there, that he'd join those. I don't know. That's a thought as well.
Yeah, the Sagari and the Uma-no-ashi are the two yokai in this week's Yokai podcast, and we appreciate you listening. You can find out more about us at themonsterguys.com, and you can look us up on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. Type in The Monster Guys, and you should be able to find us. Thanks again for hanging out with us tonight. Be looking here in just the next few days for our full-length podcast. The Monster Guys podcast will drop with another feature in our month-long series focused on yokai and Japanese culture. Good night, everyone.